Imagine this: 120 luxury homes suddenly appearing on your land, like mushrooms after a storm. The HOA president grinning smugly, lawyers in sharp suits chuckling at what they assumed was your clueless mistake. But they missed one crucial detail. I'm a forensic accountant with 15 years of experience uncovering property fraud. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I bet your HOA nightmares are just as unbelievable. What they didn't realize was that every single brick they laid was sealing their own fate. Let me explain how I turned their greed into the most satisfying legal trap they'd ever seen. The morning I returned from a 6-month consulting job in London, the Arizona sun felt especially warm on my face. I'm Brian Jordan, 45 years old, finally ready to settle down on the 50 acres my Aunt Margaret left me. The Uber driver kept shooting glances at me in the rearview mirror as we neared what should have been untouched desert. "Sir, are you sure this is the right address? This looks like a whole new development," he said, slowing the car. My stomach dropped. Where there should have been wildflowers and cacti, I saw rows of identical beige houses, 120 of them, each with perfectly trimmed lawns and HOA-approved mailboxes. A sign reading, "Emerald Heights," gleamed in polished gold. I paid the driver and headed straight into the sales office, where a cheerful blonde realtor sprang to her feet. "Welcome to Emerald Heights. Are you interested in our Phase 2 homes? We're already 70% sold." I pulled out my property deed and said, "I'm interested in knowing why there are houses on my land." Her smile faltered for a split second before returning. "Oh, you must be Mr. Jordan. Melanie Ross, our HOA president, has been expecting you. She mentioned you might have some confusion about the development agreement." The sales office was a shrine to suburban extravagance: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with glossy architectural renderings of an even grander expansion. Phase 2, it seemed, would feature a golf course and country club, also on my land. The realtor, whose name tag read Brittany, fidgeted nervously as she tapped at her keyboard. "Mrs. Ross said to send you right up if you arrived. Her office is on the 2nd floor of the administration building." She gestured toward a sleek glass building that looked more like the headquarters of a tech company than an HOA office. As I made my way through the development, my forensic accountant instincts kicked in, registering every detail. The streets were all named after gemstones: Sapphire Lane, Ruby Court, Diamond Drive. Every house was a slight variation of the same beige stucco box, distinguished only by trim colors and landscaping approved by the HOA. The landscaping was flawless but lifeless, every hedge trimmed to perfection, not a single leaf out of place. Residents walked their designer dogs or jogged in branded activewear, casting wary glances my way. I didn't belong here, on what used to be my land. Inside her sleek, intimidating office, I met Melanie Ross. She was 52, with impeccably styled silver hair and the confident, calculating smile of someone used to winning. Her desk was a monument to power: polished mahogany, her Stanford Law degree hanging behind her, flanked by civic awards clearly meant to impress and unnerve. "Brian, so glad you could finally join us," she said smoothly, pushing a thick folder toward me. "As you'll see, we sent multiple notices to your registered address regarding the development plans. When we didn't hear back, we proceeded according to the HOA bylaws your aunt agreed to back in 1998 when Emerald Heights was first proposed." She flipped open the folder, revealing pages of legal jargon, certified mail slips, and public notifications. "Everything was done by the book, I assure you," she added with a smirk. I scanned the documents, and my stomach dropped. The address used? 12 and 23 Maple Drive, my aunt's old house, which had been bulldozed 2 years ago after her death. All the certified mail receipts were stamped with the same result: delivery attempted, address not found. Melanie's expression sharpened, her tone icy but smug. "That's the address on file with the HOA. We followed protocol, Brian. Every notice, Every deadline, every chance for you to respond, documented and sent. She reclined slightly in her leather chair. I understand this may be overwhelming, but the development, it's a fait accompli. Perhaps we can discuss compensation for your cooperation, Melanie offered, her voice smooth but calculated. I studied her face closely and caught it, a barely perceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth. It was a familiar tell, one I'd seen countless times in fraud investigations. You knew that address was no longer valid, I said quietly. Her smile held steady, not even a flicker of guilt. We're required to use the address on file, she replied. It's not our responsibility to track down property owners who fail to update their contact information. She slid another document toward me. Your aunt signed this HOA agreement in 1998. It clearly states that all official communications would be sent to the address of record. I stood, keeping my expression neutral, my years as a forensic accountant giving me the discipline to remain unreadable. I'll need time to review these documents with my attorney. Her smile widened, as if she'd been expecting that exact line. Of course, she said, but I should mention that fighting this would be expensive and ultimately pointless. We're backed by Morrison, Keller and Associates. You may have heard of them. I had. They were notorious for bulldozing their way through lawsuits, the same firm that had shut down 3 environmental coalitions fighting a major pipeline project just last year. As I left her office, I caught her voice through the partially closed door, telling her assistant, "He'll fold. They always do." Walking back through the neighborhood, I began to notice more. Security cameras at every intersection, a private patrol car circling the streets, the entrance gate guarded like a military checkpoint. This wasn't just a suburban's development, it was a fortress. My aunt's 50 acres had been transformed into a highly controlled, meticulously curated environment where every detail of daily life was dictated by the HOA. I paused at the spot where her favorite oak tree used to stand, now replaced by a sterile fountain surrounded by benches bolted to the concrete. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat surrounded by folders, notes, and my laptop. This was my element. I began tracing financial records, corporate structures, HOA filings, anything that could reveal the truth. Melanie's confidence wasn't just arrogance. It was the certainty of someone who'd pulled this kind of stunt before and gotten away with it. Began with public records, and within just a few hours, I found my first breadcrumb, Melanie Ross, previously known as Melanie Ross Hutchinson. Her attorney registration had been suspended in 2016 for misconduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. The plot was thickening, and I hadn't even touched the HOA's financials yet. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard you're back in town. If you want the real story about Emerald Heights, meet me at Java Junction tomorrow at 10 a.m. A friend." I smiled. In my experience, messages like that usually came from people with either a guilty conscience or a personal vendetta. Both types often came bearing gold. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," and returned to my research. By 3 a.m., I'd mapped out 15 other properties that had mysteriously ended up under the control of Emerald Heights over the last 5 years. A pattern was emerging. Elderly owners, absentee heirs, and always the same tactic. Notices sent to outdated or invalid addresses. It was strategic, predatory, and alarmingly consistent. Java Junction was a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where the regulars notice newcomers and gossip travels faster than the espresso machine. I understood why it was chosen, far from Emerald Heights, off the radar, but public enough to offer cover. I arrived early, ordered a black coffee, and settled into a corner booth with a clear line of sight to the entrance. The place was a mix of early-rising construction workers and retirees, solving world problems between sips of coffee. At exactly 10 a.m., A woman in a navy suit stepped inside, scanning the room with obvious tension. When our eyes met, she nodded and made her way over. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Allison West. I think I can help you with your situation." She slid into the booth opposite me, setting her briefcase down with trembling hands. Up close, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes, barely masked by careful makeup. This was someone running on fumes. "I used to work for Melanie," she said, her voice low and steady, despite the nervous energy. "Right out of law school, I thought I'd found the perfect mentor. Smart, successful, respected." She paused, then opened the briefcase and took out a folder. Then I saw what she was really doing. The Emerald Heights HOA isn't just a homeowners association, Allison said, her voice tight with conviction. It's a front for a sophisticated property acquisition scheme. Melanie targets vulnerable properties, usually ones with elderly owners or absentee heirs, then uses obscure HOA bylaws to justify their absorption. Once she's got control, she partners with developers to flip the land for massive profit. She opened the folder, revealing a trove of neatly organized documents, financial records, internal emails, scanned memos. The paper trail was damning. HOAs started noticing inconsistencies about 6 months into the job, she continued. Properties were being added to the HOA's jurisdiction with no traceable authorization. I saw elderly homeowners signing paperwork they clearly didn't understand, and, worse, I found forged signatures on critical documents. Her tone sharpened, edged with fury. When I confronted Melanie, she laughed in my face, told me I was being naive. "This is how the game is played," she said. I leaned forward. "So why me? Why not take this to the authorities?" Allison let out a bitter laugh. "I tried. But Melanie's got connections. Judges, city council members, even a couple of federal agents. When I threatened to expose her, she made sure I couldn't work again. Said I was an unstable, disgruntled ex-employee. No firm in 3 states. Will touch my resume now." She pushed the folder toward me. "I kept copies of everything, including proof that she knew your aunt had passed before she sent those so-called legal notices." She flipped to an email dated 3 months before I received any formal communication about the development. "Look at this." It was a thread between Melanie and her assistant. Melanie casually confirmed my aunt's death and instructed her team to proceed with notices to the invalid address. She even joked, "Fishing in a dry pond never looked this good." I read the thread, fury rising with every line. It was more than fraud. It was predatory, calculated theft. The documents only got worse. Conversations between Melanie and her partner, Jim the Hammer Harrison, discussing how to fast-track the seizure of my land. Financial records revealing millions quietly funneled into offshore accounts. But one document stood out, a technical report buried in the pile. "What's this about soil contamination?" I asked, flipping through the pages. Allison's lips curled into a smile for the first time. "That's your ace in the hole." Melanie was in such a rush to develop she cut corners on the environmental assessments that land required remediation before construction could legally begin. But she didn't wait. "Those 120 homes," she leaned in, "they're sitting on contaminated soil." And she knew. "Every single building permit was obtained fraudulently," Allison said flatly. "They cut every corner they could." She pulled out another folder, this one thinner, but more personal. "And your aunt? She wasn't just another target. She was a threat. Look at these." Inside were letters, pages of correspondence between my aunt and various state and federal regulatory agencies, formal complaints filed with the State Bar Association, even a report from a private investigator. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my aunt's sharp cursive, fierce and direct even on paper. She had known. She'd seen it all coming and tried to stop it the only way she could, by documenting everything. Over the next 2 hours, Allison laid out the entire scope of the operation. The HOA would identify vulnerable properties, usually those with absentee or deceased owners, then send legally required notices to outdated addresses they knew were no longer valid. When no response came, they'd invoke a buried clause in the original HOA charter about property abandonment. That gave them just enough legal pretext to seize control. Once in control, they'd fast-track development with Jim, Harrison's firm, skipping safety regulations, using substandard materials, and building fast. Then, before any legal challenge could catch up, they'd sell the homes to unsuspecting buyers, cash out, and disappear behind layers of shell companies. They've done this to at least 15 other properties, Allison said, her voice steady but urgent. But your case is different. You have the background to dismantle this, and more importantly, you came back before the scheme ran its full course. That never happens. She showed me a carefully detailed timeline. Melanie's pattern was to wait a full year before finalizing sales and obscuring ownership through LLCs and fake trusts. But I had returned after only 6 months. She'd sold some homes, but not enough to hide the entire development. There was still a way to unravel it, legally, publicly, and in a way that could bring the whole scheme down. She's panicking, Allison said. That's why she met with you herself. That's why she offered compensation instead of threats. You're not just a threat, you're a wild card she didn't account for. I leaned back, absorbing it all. Why should I trust you? For all I know, this could be another setup, Allison didn't flinch. Because I'm the reason you inherited that land in the first place. My breath caught. Your aunt was my mentor in law school, she said quietly. She saw what Melanie was doing years ago. She changed her will to leave the property to someone who could actually fight back. She told me, Brian's the smartest person in this family. He won't let them get away with it. She paused, her eyes steady on mine. She believed. In you, and after everything I've seen, so do I. She pulled out a handwritten letter. She left this for you in case something like this happened. My aunt's familiar handwriting blurred as I read, Dear Brian, if you're reading this, then Melanie Ross has made her move. I've watched her circle like a vulture for years, waiting for me to die. The land isn't just property, it's evidence. Look beneath the old oak tree near the creek. I've buried something that will help you bring her down. Trust Allison, she's one of the good ones. Love, Aunt Margaret. I folded the letter carefully. Looks like we have some digging to do. As we prepared to leave, Allison turned to me. There's something else you need to know. Ellie's not working alone. She's part of a network that stretches across multiple states. The Emerald Heights model has been replicated in Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. They're targeting retirement communities and exploiting property laws and HOA regulations wherever they can. Your aunt figured it out. That's why she was such a threat. She wasn't just protecting her land. She was trying to expose a criminal enterprise operating on a much larger scale. That afternoon, with shovels and determination, Allison and I unearthed my aunt's insurance policy, a waterproof box filled with original HOA documents, recorded conversations, and a diary meticulously cataloging every suspicious activity she had observed. But the most shocking discovery was a set of geological surveys from 1997 showing significant natural gas deposits beneath the property. That's why Melanie wants the land so badly, Allison whispered. It's not just about the houses. She's planning to sell the mineral rights to Excelsior Energy for $50 million once she gains full control. That evening, I started building a detailed timeline of Melanie's fraudulent activities. The pattern was undeniable, but patterns alone wouldn't hold up in court. I needed solid evidence, and more importantly, I needed Melanie to incriminate herself. That's when the idea hit me. Allison, how would you like to play double agent? I asked. She raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I laid out my plan. Allison's role was to approach Melanie, pretending she wanted back in and offering to help manage the Brian Jordan problem. Meanwhile, I would play the overwhelmed heir, looking to cut a deal and settle for a fraction of what the land was worth. The HOA meeting took place in the community center, a sleek, modern building, ironically funded in part by my inheritance. The room was filled with residents, many of whom stared at me like I was the enemy. Melanie stood at the front, commanding, Attention in a sharp power suit. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, her voice polished and authoritative. "As you know, we're dealing with ownership claims from Mr. Brian Jordan." She gestured in my direction. "While we sympathize with his confusion, the fact remains that this development was established legally and in good faith." I stood, up slowly, feigning uncertainty. "I just want what's fair," I said, letting a tremor slip into my voice. "My aunt left me this land, and now it's covered in houses. I don't want to displace anyone, but there should be compensation." There was a low murmur from the crowd, some supportive, most skeptical. Melanie offered a tight, insincere smile. "Of course, Brian. We're willing to offer you $200,000 for any lingering claims. That's more than fair, considering the project was properly approved." "200,000?" I echoed, lowering my gaze to the papers in my hand, giving the impression I was weighing it seriously. The undeveloped land was worth at least $5 million. Melanie noticed the hesitation. "Was worth, Mr. Jordan," she corrected, her tone. "Clipped. Past tense. The situation has changed." That's when Jim Harrison stood up. He was broad and sun-baked, the kind of tan you earn from days on a golf course, not a construction site. "Look, buddy," he said, voice slow and smug, "you can take the offer or you can spend the next 10 years in court. Your choice. Lie." Let the moment hang before pulling out my phone. "Before I decide," I said, "there's something everyone here should hear." I hit play. Melanie's voice rang out clearly from the speaker. "Of course I knew the old bat was dead. That's why I sent the notices there. Brian Jordan was in London, probably sipping tea and eating crumpets. By the time he figured it out, we'd have everything locked down tight." The room erupted. Residents shouted, some demanding answers, others cursing. Melanie's face turned from smug confidence to ghostly panic. That's taken out of context," she stammered, her voice faltering, but I wasn't finished. "I also have copies of the real environmental reports," I said, raising a second folder. "The ones showing contamination levels 3 times the legal limit. The ones you buried while these families moved into toxic homes." The room went silent for a breathless moment. Then chaos broke loose. Now the residents were on their feet, shouting and demanding answers. Jim Harrison made a move toward the side door, but found his path blocked by Connell Lewis, my childhood neighbor, and now one of Emerald Heights' own. "I don't think so, Jim," Connell said firmly, arms crossed. "We all need to hear this." Melanie tried to take back control. "This is absurd. He's clearly fabricated those recordings. I'll be filing defamation charges first thing tomorrow." But the doubt had already taken hold, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I stepped forward with more documents in hand. "While we're on the topic of legal matters, did anyone know that HOA funds have been used to cover Melanie's personal legal defense in not 1, but 3 separate fraud cases? Or that the construction company responsible for building your homes has filed for bankruptcy twice, under different names each time?" The room exploded again. Residents yelled over each other. Melanie bolted for her office, Jim right behind her. People crowded around me, bombarding me with questions. A young father, clutching a baby, looked me straight in the eye. "How deep does this go? Are our homes even safe?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm working with the authorities to uncover everything. Your homes are structurally sound, but there are issues, serious ones, that need fixing. My fight isn't with any of you. It's with the people who exploited all of us." That night, Allison called with an update. "Melanie's panicking. She's wiring money to offshore accounts, shredding documents. But here's the kicker. She called someone she referred to as the senator. Said things were spinning out of control." I allowed myself a grim smile. "Good. Panicked people make mistakes. What about our friends at the federal level?" Her voice lit up. "The FBI agent you reached out to, he's very interested. Turns out they've been building a case against Jim Harrison for money laundering, but couldn't connect him to Melanie until now. Just after I hung up, a new email hit my inbox from an anonymous sender. Back off or things will get very unpleasant for you. You don't know who you're dealing with. Attached was a photo of my house in Boston. I forwarded the email to the FBI without hesitation, then texted Allison. Looks like we're rattling the right cages. Her response came instantly. Melanie just offered me $1 million to steal your evidence and vanish. Want me to take it? Laughed out loud. Absolutely. Let's see how she plans to pay you. By morning, everything was in motion. Melanie had filed an emergency injunction accusing me of harassment and defamation. But in her rush, she'd made a crucial mistake. Buried in her filing were financial documents that actually backed up everything I'd said. Her lawyer, a pale, jittery man who kept adjusting his tie, realized it too late. Judge Patricia Reeves, known for her no-nonsense stance on property law, lifted an eyebrow as she examined the thick court file. "Counselor, did you actually read these attachments before submitting them?" she asked sharply. The young attorney, Kevin Marsh, turned, a deep shade of red. "Your Honor, we filed these documents under extreme time pressure. My client believed it was urgent to protect the community from—" Judge Reeves didn't let him finish. "From what exactly? From learning the truth? About their homes?" Her voice was razor-sharp as she flipped a page. "These bank statements clearly show systematic transfers from HOA accounts to offshore entities. Is your client aware that financial disclosures submitted to this court fall under perjury statutes?" At the defendant's table, Melanie looked, visibly panicked, whispering rapidly to a man who had just entered the courtroom. Richard Blackstone, infamous in Arizona real estate law, stood with polished confidence. "Your Honor, if I may take over for my colleague, I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the scope and intent of these documents." But Judge Reeves was unmoved. "Mr. Blackstone, I don't care if you're replacing counsel. What's been filed is now part of the public record, and it shows troubling irregularities that merit immediate investigation." Outside the courtroom, Melanie was moving with frantic urgency. She had already managed to push through sales on 80 of the 120 homes, bulldozing past red flags and due diligence at an alarming pace. Rather than interfere, I let her keep going. Each rushed sale created another injured party, another future plaintiff. Every deal she closed in haste was another misstep I could use against her. Allison, playing her role flawlessly, was inside the operation, slipping me updates while pretending to help Melanie tidy her mess. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Nguyen at the county recorder's office. She was a forensic auditor with a sharp eye for deception and years of experience dissecting real estate fraud for the FBI. As we combed through deeds, transfer records, and escrow filings, she gave a low whistle. "Brian, this is worse than we thought." She pointed to a cluster of closing documents. "See these? Same notary listed on all of them. But the license expired 3 years ago. That makes every single one of these transactions legally questionable." I leaned in to study them more closely. "And the timing, look. All of these were processed within 72 hours. Patricia nodded gravely. "No legitimate operation processes this many closings that fast without cutting corners. It's a textbook case of fraudulent conveyance. She's trying to scatter ownership so widely and so chaotically that no one can untangle it. It's an old asset protection tactic, but she's doing it so sloppily, she's leaving a trail of evidence a mile wide." Later that night, at a truck stop just outside town, Allison slid into the booth across from me, her expression tense. She's unraveling, offering deep discounts to cash buyers, rushing deals through without inspections, and I'm pretty sure she's forging signatures on disclosure forms. "She's desperate," I said quietly, watching headlights sweep past the window. "That's when people start making real mistakes." She handed me a flash drive, her face pale but determined. "I copied everything before she could destroy it," she said. Emails, invoices, there's one where she explicitly instructs Jim to use substandard materials to cut costs. Then she slid a folder across the table, marked confidential. "These are internal HOA communications, something called project here, clean sweep. Melanie's been planning to demolish the original section of Emerald Heights, including where your aunt's house once stood, to build a luxury resort. The contamination was going to be her excuse to condemn the properties and force residents to sell at bargain prices. My fists clenched. So she pollutes the land, uses that as leverage to evict people, then profits from rebuilding? Allison nodded, her voice grim. And she's been bribing environmental inspectors with HOA funds to keep the contamination reports under wraps. The corruption ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. I spent the rest of the day building a detailed flow chart of Melanie's empire, following the money through a maze of shell corporations, fake contractors, and offshore accounts. By nightfall, the lines led to 3 city council members, 2 state legislators, and a federal judge. What she'd created wasn't just fraud. It was an entire ecosystem of corruption. But even the most intricate networks have pressure points. And I was getting close. That evening, my phone rang. "Mr. Jordan," said a voice, "this is Special Agent David Chen with the FBI. We've been monitoring the situation. We'd like to meet." 2 hours later, I was in a windowless federal office, staring at a corkboard web of faces, companies, wire transfers, and encrypted communications. Melanie and Jim were at the center of it all. "We've had our eyes on Harrison for over a year and a half," Agent Chen said. "But Ross, she's been too careful, until now." He pointed to a photo of a silver-haired man in a tailored suit. "Senator William Thornton. We believe he's provided political cover in exchange for campaign donations. Your evidence could be what breaks this wide open." I nodded slowly. Allison mentioned someone she called the Senator. "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "But now we need something stronger. We want you to meet with Melanie and offer to settle. Wear a wire. Get her talking about the network, the bribes, the cover-ups." I hesitated. "She's sharp. She'll be watching for a setup." "That's why," Chen said, his mouth tightening into a grim smile. "We'll make her believe she's already won." The sting was set for Friday afternoon. But Thursday night, it almost came crashing down. Jim Harrison, either paranoid or smarter than we gave him credit for, confronted Allison in the HOA office after hours. He accused her of being a plant. The situation escalated. He grabbed her arm, threatened her, said they'd handled people like Brian before. And then he made his fatal mistake. He bragged that the senator will bury all of you. What Jim didn't know was that Allison had been recording everything on her phone. She broke free and drove straight to the FBI field office. The agents had what they needed. But by Friday morning the situation had changed again, and not in our favor. Jim had disappeared, taking $5 million from the HOA accounts with him. Melanie was now in full-blown panic. Her desperation made her volatile, dangerous, yes, but also careless. When I entered her office that afternoon, a wire hidden beneath my shirt, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "What do you want?" "Jordan!" she snapped, the mask of professionalism long gone, replaced by a raw, survival-driven edge. "I want to end this," I said evenly. "You've sold most of the homes. You've made your money. I'll take $10 million and sign whatever." "You need," she narrowed her eyes, calculating. $10 million? You're insane." But I could see her weighing the offer, judging the cost against the risk. $5 million, she countered, "and you sign an NDA. This never gets mentioned again." I hesitated deliberately before shaking my head. $8 million in cash. "Tonight?" She let out a brittle laugh. "Cash? What is this, a movie?" But I could tell she was considering it. Cash meant no paper trail. It meant she could pay me with the stolen HOA funds. "I know Jim took the money," I said softly. "And I know about the offshore accounts, Caymans maybe?" Her face drained of color. "How do you—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You'll give me $8 million in cash. I disappear, and you better hope I stay gone." For a second I thought she might call my bluff, but then her posture sagged. "Tonight, 10 o'clock. The old warehouse on Route 47. Come alone." Meanwhile, word of the missing HOA funds spread like wildfire through Emerald Heights. By Saturday morning, clusters of worried residents had formed, demanding answers. I called a meeting at the community center, though this one carried a much different tone. "I know you're scared," I began, facing a crowd of anxious faces. "You've poured your savings into these homes. You're worried about losing everything." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "My fight is not with you. It's with Melanie Ross and Jim Harrison, and I need your help to make sure justice is done." I laid it all out. Melanie's fraud, the illegally acquired land, the manipulation. But I also made it clear the residents were victims, not perpetrators. "Here's my offer," I said. "If you're willing to testify about anything unusual, pressure to close early, skipped inspection, strange fees, I'll make sure your home ownership remains secure. Any legal damages awarded will go into a fund to fix the environmental problems and protect your property values." The reaction was immediate and powerful. Around 90% of the homeowners agreed to help. Stories came flooding in: fake documents, intimidation, bribery. An elderly couple even revealed that Melanie had convinced them to sink their entire retirement into a phony HOA fund, promising 15% returns. Another family discovered that their home inspection had been completed before the house was even built. Each new account added another layer to the growing mountain of evidence. That evening, as I got ready for the warehouse meeting, my phone rang. It was Melanie. Her voice was tight, almost breaking. "Change of plans," she said. "I'll have someone drop the money at your hotel." She was scared, probably thinking she was walking into a trap. "No deal," I said firmly. "Face to face, or I go public tomorrow morning." There was a long pause. "Fine," she snapped, "but I'm bringing security." I smiled to myself. "Bring whoever you want, just bring the money." The warehouse was an old cavernous structure that once stored farm equipment. Now it was empty and eerily quiet, a perfect place for a secret exchange. I arrived early, scoped out exits and hiding spots. The FBI had wanted to wire the place themselves, but I convinced them to hang back. Melanie would run at the first hint of federal involvement. Instead, I wore a new wire, top-of-the-line gear that could transmit through thick concrete. At exactly 10 p.m., headlights lit up the dusty windows. Melanie walked in with two men who looked like they belonged in a strongman competition. She carried a duffel bag that thudded as she dropped it at my feet. $8 million, she said. "Count it if you want." I unzipped the bag, neatly stacked. Bundles of $100 bills filled it. "Looks about right," I said coolly. "Now, about that NDA." She handed me a document. "Sign it. Take the money. Disappear. And if I ever see you again, if you so much as whisper about this—" "You'll what?" I interrupted. "Have me killed, like you did with Thomas Brennan?" Her expression froze. The color drained from her face. Thomas Brennan, the journalist who had been investigating HOA corruption 3 years ago, his death had officially been an accident. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, but her security guards shifted uneasily. "No?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Because I have an interesting email where you talk about permanently solving the Brennan problem with someone named Victor." That was the breaking point. One of her guards went for his weapon. In that instant, the warehouse doors burst open. FBI agents poured in, weapons raised. Melanie screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They tackled and cuffed her. "You set me up," she screamed, glaring at me. "You'll pay for this." "I think you're the one who's going to pay," I said. "And that money you brought, it's marked." The serial numbers were logged when Jim took it from the HOA accounts. As they hauled her away, she turned one last time, eyes burning. "You don't understand. This is bigger than me. They'll come after you." I watched the FBI car disappear into the night, the words echoing in my head. They. Whoever they were, I'd worry about them later. Tonight, justice wasn't just served, it was broadcast. Melanie's arrest lit up the headlines. And by dawn, the fallout had begun. 3 city council members abruptly resigned, and Senator Thornton's office rushed out a press release claiming he had no knowledge of the Emerald Heights scandal. Sure, I thought. just like you had no knowledge of those conveniently timed campaign donations from Harrison's LLCs. At the federal courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Melanie stood accused of 37 counts: fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. Jim the Hammer. Harrison, caught trying to sneak over the border with a fake passport and a briefcase full of burner phones, had already flipped. The FBI cut him a deal: testify against Melanie, and they'd shave off his decades-long sentence. But the real kicker? The prosecutor announced that an active U.S. senator was now under federal investigation. Cameras flashed, anchors speculated, and by lunchtime, every major network had broken into regular programming. I took the stand on the third day of the hearing. The courtroom was tense, packed with journalists, activists, and residents from the very community that had once stood on my land. Then came Richard Blackstone, Melanie's attorney, a legal viper in a $3,000 pinstripe suit, polished to a mirror. Shine. He approached the stand with a smirk that screamed confidence. "Mr. Jordan," he purred, "isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against my client? That all of this is just an elaborate plot to extort money from a respected businesswoman?" I didn't blink. "No, counselor. I didn't orchestrate this to extort anyone. I exposed a criminal enterprise that defrauded countless victims. The only extortion here was committed by your client." Blackstone kept his grin. "And yet you claim to be a forensic accountant while simultaneously engaging in questionable tactics, wearing a wire, pretending to accept a bribe. How is that not entrapment?" Before I could answer, Allison passed a note to the lead prosecutor. He stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant initiated the bribe as clearly demonstrated in the recorded conversation." "Sustained," Judge Carter ruled. "Move on, Mr. Blackstone." But Blackstone didn't let up. For the next hour, he tried everything, twisting facts, painting me as a self-righteous manipulator, implying I was after fame or revenge. But with every accusation, I had the receipts. Every challenge opened the door for me to reveal more: emails, forged signatures, fake addresses, shell companies, hidden accounts. The jury watched, riveted. Then I dropped the hammer. "Your Honor," I said, standing, "I'd like to direct the court's attention to Whitmore versus Henderson, 1896. Blackstone scoffed. "Relevance, Your Honor? We're not here to discuss century-old property disputes." But Judge Carter leaned forward. "I'll allow it. Proceed, Mr. Jordan." I opened a leather-bound law book, its spine creaking for effect. In Whitmore, the state Supreme Court ruled that any structure erected on private land without the owner's explicit permission immediately becomes the property of said landowner, regardless of the builder's costs, intent, or development plans. I paused. You could hear a pin drop. This precedent was upheld in Morrison v. State in 1952 and reaffirmed in Consolidated Developers v. Williams, 1998, which means that every single house built on my land now legally belongs to me. Silence. Then a murmur. Then chaos. Reporters scrambled. Residents gasped. Melanie, for the first time, looked genuinely shaken. The judge banged the gavel. "Order!" But the damage was done. The defense's case wasn't just in trouble. It was disintegrating. Furthermore, I continued, steadying my voice, Arizona Revised Statute 40173 makes it clear that improvements made in bad faith cannot be claimed by the trespasser. The statute explicitly lists fraudulent conveyance of property rights as grounds for forfeiture. Across the courtroom, Blackstone scrambled through his binder. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These are outdated statutes that haven't been enforced in decades." Judge Carter leaned in, unamused. "Actually, Counselor, Whitmore v. Henderson was cited just last year in Peterson v. Maricopa County. Please continue, Mr. Jordan." "Thank you, Your Honor." I allowed myself a small, deliberate smile. Given these precedents and the overwhelming evidence of fraud, We can prove that Ms. Ross not only engaged in criminal activity, but, under Arizona law, forfeited all improvements made to the land. That includes every single one of the 120 homes constructed. As the rightful landowner, I am now the legal owner of those improvements. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the prosecution team seemed momentarily caught off guard. Allison blinked in surprise, though we'd rehearsed this scenario. Blackstone's face darkened. "This is absurd," he growled. "You're saying my client built 120 homes and now stands to lose all of them over a procedural technicality?" I turned to face him calmly. "It's not a technicality, counselor. It's the law, one your client tried to weaponize for personal gain." At the defendant's table, Melanie seized Blackstone's arm, her voice a hiss, but loud enough for the court reporter to catch. "Do something! Call the senator. If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." Judge Carter's gavel slammed down. "Order! Ms. Ross, you will refrain from making threats in this courtroom." But the damage had already been done. Within hours, federal agents raided Senator Thornton's office. The investigation was no longer confined to property fraud. It had expanded into full-scale political corruption. The next phase of the trial shifted focus to environmental violations. I presented documentation showing Melanie had paid off inspectors to ignore soil and water contamination that rendered the land unfit for residential use without major remediation. Photos, falsified reports, and testimony from whistleblowers painted a damning picture. In her reckless pursuit of profit, I told the court, Ms. Ross not only endangered lives, but created long-term liability under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. She didn't just ignore the law, she amplified the risk. And now, it's time for accountability. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it was the stillness that comes before a verdict. She's now personally liable for cleanup costs, estimated at $30 million. Blackstone made one last attempt to salvage their position. "Your Honor," their lawyer began, "even if we accept Mr. Jordan's interpretation of property law, which we don't, the innocent homeowners who bought these properties in good faith surely have some rights. It was the opportunity I'd been waiting for." "Absolutely, Counselor," I said. "That's why I'm proposing a settlement in which each homeowner can repurchase their property at the original purchase price, with all fraudulent fees and kickbacks subtracted. All profits from the process will be placed into a remediation and victim restitution fund." Judge Carter gave a nod of approval. "A remarkably equitable solution, Mr. Jordan. Mr. West, does your client support this proposal?" Allison rose confidently. "We do, Your Honor. My client's primary concern has always been justice for the victims, not personal gain." The judge turned to the prosecution. "Does the government object to incorporating this framework into a potential plea agreement?" The lead prosecutor stood. "No objection, Your Honor. In fact, we believe Mr. Jordan's model could become a template for addressing future cases of HOA-related fraud." Suddenly, Melanie jumped up, her chair crashing behind her. "This is a kangaroo court. You're all part of it. The senator promised me protection. He said the fix was in." Her outburst was the final nail in the coffin. The judge ordered her removed from the courtroom and immediately revoked her bail. Once calm was restored, I presented the last piece of evidence, a comprehensive financial analysis detailing Melanie's use of shell companies to funnel funds through the HOA. "Your Honor," I said, pointing to the chart, "this shows that over the past 5 years, roughly $47 million moved through these accounts, an unmistakable pattern of classic money laundering." The judge called a recess to review the data. When court reconvened, her ruling was swift and unambiguous. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, and particularly Ms. Ross's own statements, I find ample grounds to proceed with all charges. Furthermore, I grant the plaintiff's motion regarding property ownership contingent on the proposed restitution structure. Outside the courthouse, Allison looked at me, visibly impressed. That was brilliant. How long have you been planning this? I smiled. Since the day I read Whitmore vs. Henderson. Sometimes the best trap is the one your enemy builds themselves. Melanie was so obsessed with exploiting loopholes, she never imagined those same technicalities could be turned against her. That night, the news aired footage of Melanie in handcuffs, still shouting about conspiracies as agents led her away. The headline read, HOA President's Greed Becomes Her Prison. Landmark case sets new precedent. 3 months later at her sentencing, the courtroom was once again packed. The judge didn't hold back. Mrs. Ross, she said, you betrayed the trust of hundreds of families, corrupted officials, and showed utter disregard for the law and basic decency. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, without parole. As the gavel fell, my thoughts drifted to Aunt Margaret. Her plan had worked flawlessly. She always believed I'd uncover the legal angle everyone else had missed. In the end, she was right. Sometimes the best revenge really is living. Well, this victory belongs to all of us, I said, scanning the room, once a battleground, now a beacon. Not because justice came easily, but because we refused to be silent, because we stood together. There was a long moment of silence, then applause. Not the polite kind, but something deeper, something earned. The anniversary had become more than just a commemoration of Melanie Ross's arrest. It marked the rebirth of a community, the starts of a legacy forged from ruin. Children played outside on streets once lined with uncertainty. Seniors who'd nearly lost their homes now volunteered at the school funded by the Mineral Trust. And the once dreaded HOA had been transformed into a democratic, transparent body where residents actually felt heard. After the ceremony, Connell approached me, handing over a photo. My Aunt Margaret standing proudly on the porch of her old house, one hand resting on a surveyor's pole. She knew, he said quietly. She saw what was coming long before we did. I nodded, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. And she left a map for us to find our way back. Later that evening, I walked past the spot where Melanie's office once stood, now replaced by a thriving community garden. A plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of those who fought for justice and those who never stopped believing it was possible." Allison joined me as the sun dipped behind the hills. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. I smiled. "Sometimes, but I think this, what we built here, is the answer," she nodded. "Funny, isn't it? How a land dispute became a revolution." I looked out over Emerald Heights. Reborn. Not a revolution, I said. A restoration. Of what was stolen. Of what's possible. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. To everyone who stood up, spoke out, and refused to let corruption win. To my Aunt Margaret, who saw it coming and laid the groundwork for justice, and to this community that chose unity over division, truth over convenience, this victory belongs to all of you. After the speeches, as neighbors lingered and shared their stories, I found myself standing where Aunt Margaret's wildflower field once bloomed. In its place now stood a playground, alive with children's laughter. Their parents watched from benches, free eta. Last from threats of bogus fees and sudden foreclosures, Connell approached, handing me a cold beer. "You know, Brian, when you first showed up, some of us thought you were the enemy. Now look at this place." He swept his hand toward the vibrant neighborhood. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. As the sun dipped below, the horizon casting golden light over Emerald Heights, I thought about the journey that led here, from that first jarring morning to this hard-earned peace. The accountant in me appreciated the symmetry, debits balanced, credits reconciled, justice rendered. But the human in me took greater joy in what had grown from the rubble, trust, transparency, and a stronger, united community. As I turned to rejoin the celebration, I could almost hear Aunt Margaret's voice riding the breeze. "Well done, Brian. Well done indeed." The wildflowers were gone, but something far more enduring had taken root. Melanie had been right about one thing. She had walked into a legal trap. But it wasn't mine. It was hers, constructed piece by piece, with every forged document, every threatened homeowner, every law bent for profit. The very system she tried to manipulate had recoiled, delivering the poetic justice she never saw coming. This wasn't just a win in court. It was a reckoning, the kind where the good guys don't just win, they rebuild. Where the money stolen in greed becomes the seed for something better. And if you're hearing this from a place where HOA horror stories are still far too real, let this be a reminder. Document everything, question authority, and never underestimate the power of ordinary people working together, because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not just my victory, but ours, the triumph of everyone who ever felt powerless against a system designed to silence them. We are proof that with persistence, strategy, and the courage to stand together, even the biggest giants can be brought down.